Live struggle legacy. It's a whole movement.
Hey everybody, it's your boy MP, Live Struggle Legacy, and welcome to episode 3 of the Live Struggle Legacy podcast. So we're jumping right into the middle of a story, y'all. So if you want to be up to speed, you might want to hold off on watching this one and go back and watch episode 1 so you know what Live Struggle Legacy is all about. And watch episode 2 so it can bring you up to speed to my life, because I'm tapping into who is Michael Paul, who is MP, recording artist and curator of Live Struggle Legacy. Now, real quick, if you haven't already done so, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, follow, whatever you got to do to stay connected with the content that we're putting out. Please support and engage, right? That's how we can keep it coming, and that's how you can get the latest content. So in episode 2, I talked about the early years. I brought it all the way back to my grandparents, my parents, my childhood. And I talked about the transition between growing up in this kind of just about fantasy life to getting dropped off into the streets, so to speak. So first of all, where I grew up in St. Pete, it wasn't the hood per se, but the hood wasn't far away, right? And being a young boy, you know, boys and girls are different. My sister could sit in the house and watch movies. She could read books, write stories, do art projects. Boys are a little bit different, you know. So in the last episode, I told you about how the basketball goal and having that in front of the house kind of connected me to the community. Well, when you reach a certain age, and you're growing up in South St. Pete, not everybody's playing sports anymore, at least not where I was at, not the people I was around. So, you know, you start to kind of go out and explore, so to speak. And my situation was a little bit unique because, first of all, race is a thing, and there's nothing anybody could say to argue that. But growing up in the desert in Arizona, I had no concept of race at all. None. No concept of color. My parents didn't raise me like that. St. Pete was a wake-up call for me because clearly everybody did. You know, the Italians across the street, they'd be cool with, you know, all the black people in the neighborhood, which I didn't see any difference, but quickly people let you see. When this person leaves, they start talking about this person and so on and so and such, you know, and you start to, and then next thing you know, I'm stepping outside and all of a sudden I'm being called a cracker and getting hit in my shit for, I don't understand what happened, what I do, right? So, you know, of course, as an intelligent human being, and I'm not saying that am such, but as somebody with a fucking brain, you start to learn history and you start to understand why things are the way they are rather than trying to play some little victim game, right? So, and I think it's important I explain that because I'm going to just be real with y'all. I found more acceptance in the hood, not the neighborhood that I lived in the hood, than I found in my own neighborhood. I found more acceptance by people who didn't look like me than the people who did. And so I gravitated towards that, right? And let's just be real. I wasn't an athlete, so I wasn't involved in sports. I'm hanging out in the streets. You know, I'm going to see dog fights, which I do not condone, but that was something to do. I would actually help take care of dogs, and in the process of doing that, you're meeting different people. But the one thing that was keeping me sane and probably kept me alive through this Great Depression, right, that I was experiencing in this big transition from this perfect life in the desert to, you know, this life in South St. Pete. And that was bud, weed. I'll never forget, like, when I first found weed, it was like all my problems were solved. I could roll this shit up and smoke this shit and not worry about nothing, you know? And so I started smoking weed when I was about 11. You know, sporadically. Always trying to get it, but shit, as an 11-year-old, it's not that easy. I mean, you got to get out there, but, you know, early on, I'll never forget, and a lot of y'all gonna laugh, and I know a lot of people went through this, but when you're a little white boy and you're green as fuck, and you're trying to go get weed at 11, it's like, hey, yeah, let me get your money. I'll be right back. You know, I had to learn a lot of that, and then eventually learn how to, you know, stand up for myself and protect myself and protect my assets and whatnot. But looking back, it's comedy. Back then it wasn't. So, you know, in the last episode, I told you how I was constantly looking for role models, how my father was away and, you know, constantly trying to control things from prison. And, you know, my mom wasn't always present. Now, one thing I can say, my mom always held it down for the holidays. She did what she could. But let's just say what it is. My mom wasn't cut out to be a housewife. She was still doing her thing. She was young, still had her friends, still wanted to party. You know, my dad set up this crazy lifestyle for her. And that could not be sustained when we lost everything and my dad went to prison. So, you know, my mom's always out. And my house kind of became like, I don't want to call it an orphanage, but we'll call it more like a refuge, like a neighborhood refuge. Kids would run away. They'd come over to my house because there was no supervision. You could smoke at my house. You could drink at my house. You could be who you are at my house without, you know, any reservation. And, so my house kind of became this spot. And so, you know, back then, this was the early stages of trap houses and when the term trap came to be. Now, life got real hard for me, you know, in those early days of transitioning from Arizona to Florida. And of course, weed was the refuge. But I mean, let's be real. Weed ain't for free, right? It ain't like I had a big homie just putting me on. No, there was no big homies, right? The big homie was trying to take my necklace. This motherfucker beat me up and take my bike, right? And all that, you name it. So, you know, I had to get creative. And my sister was 3 years older than me. And one thing I can say about my sister, as different as she was than I was, and as much as we didn't see eye to eye on a lot, you know, my mom wasn't present. My dad was locked up. My sister felt responsible for me, like she had to protect me. So, you know, I'd be jumping in the car with somebody, you know, 4 years older than me, trying to, you know, ride through the hood, find a trap house or whatever. Meanwhile, get robbed, beat up, everything in between, trying to make that happen. And then by the time my sister started driving, this is gonna sound fucked up, but when I was like 12, my sister was 15, and I remember my grandma gave her a car when she was 15. She was driving with a learner's permit. And me and all my little neighborhood homeboys would pile in my sister's yellow boxed Volvo with no tint, and we would go hit the spots, hit the trap houses, you know. I'm not going to say no direct locations. This is years ago. These places are gone. Like right over there behind the McDonald's off of 18th, there was like a little drive-through spot we used to go to. And we were little kids. We were like little babies. They wouldn't serve us. They're scared. They think we're the police or they're going to, you know, catch a charge fucking with us. So my sister was 15, but she was like real developed and she was pretty. So I used to like have my sister like, look, you know, they'll give it to you. They want to, you know, get your number or whatever. So my sister would go into the trap and get the weed and then get it, you know, bring it to us. So, but she did that to protect me. And the things I think about that my sister did to try to protect me as my older sister, I mean, and not being of that life, you know, putting herself in these crazy, vulnerable situations just to look out for me and try to be present for the things that she knew I was going to do regardless if she was there or not. So, you know, I love my sister for a number of reasons, but in retrospect, man, she made major compromises for me as her little brother. So much love and respect to my sister. But these are the early days of how I started trapping. So my sister had these older friends, and these older friends would come over, and you know, they'd be 19, 18, and well, maybe a little bit younger because they were still in high school. So we'll say 17, right? But I swear I think some of them were 18, 19, still in high school. But they all had cars. And one thing about being in South St. Pete, I could go to not any store, but you know, we had Bimby's, we had the drive-through store off of 9th just before you get to 18th. And I could be 12 years old and walk up there with a backpack and say, yo, like, you know, I need 3 quarts of St. Ides. I need 2 quarts of OE. You know what I mean? Like you could, that's what we were drinking back then, like malt liquor, St. Ides, Special Brew, Old English, Colt 45. Like these are the things we came up on. And Philly Blunts, right? These are the days when you could go to the drive-through store and with $1 and you could get a honey bun, a juice, a Black and Mild, and a Philly. This is before we even were on the Swishers, right? We started with Phillies and then graduated to Swishers. But that's all four for $1, including tax. You paid a quarter. I'm showing my age right here. You pay a quarter for a Black and Mild. You pay a quarter for a Philly. You pay a quarter for a honey bun and a quarter for the little pop top juice, right? All that for $1. The things we could do with our lunch money. And like my early days of going to the trap, I would lie like a motherfucker. I'd tell my mom, we're going to go bowling. This is back when they had Sunshine Bowling Alley, if you remember that. That was like the only thing we had on the south side back then. And we'd be like, we're going bowling. So she'd be like, okay. So she'd give me like $10 for bowling, $10 for food, right? So like she'd give me a dub. So shit, bowling. We get in the car. We go to the trap. I get either 3 for 10 or 5 for 20, sometimes 6 for 20. So, you know, the whole idea is, you know, I'm smoking 1, selling 2, you know, then I got a little extra to go back and do it again. So these are the early days of hustling. We weren't hustling to get by. I'm going to be all the way real. We were hustling to get high, right? And so that's how it started. And, you know, right around this time, my grandfather, who was probably the epitome of what a man should be in my life, like the one true role model, but he lived in New York. We only got to see him maybe, you know, a couple times a year. But I can honestly say that when I think of what a man is and should be, that's who I think of, my grandfather. That's why I named my son after my grandfather, Raphael. And, you know, he was getting older. And, but when you're a kid, you don't think about that. You think your grandparents are going to live forever. And by then I was in high school, you know, already full-blown hustling. But, well, I wouldn't say full-blown hustling. I was lightweight hustling. Petty hustling, you know, selling nicks for dimes and, you know, that kind of thing. Whatever I could do to just smoke for free without, you know, having to, I had no job, of course, you know, my mom's only going to give me so much money for bowling and pizza and whatnot, but that I would clearly use to go to the trap. But what I'm getting at is, my grandfather was like that moral compass. And when he started to get sick, I didn't see it coming. I'll never forget. I was in the 9th grade. I was probably 13 years old. My daddy was on the tail end of his bed. My grandfather died a couple months before my dad got out of prison. And he called us from the hospital, and I remember hearing the weakness in his voice, and I remember him saying, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. Don't worry. You know, I love you. Everything's going to be okay. And I truly believed it in my heart. And I think it was later on that night they told me that he passed. And I mean, you know, I was too young to understand that he was in a lot of pain, and it was okay. It was his time, you know. He was 86. He lived a good life. But that it hit me hard. It hit me hard, and I started smoking more than I ever smoked. And I'm not gonna lie, I was smoking Newports and all back then. Newport 100s, the long boys, yeah. And you know, 13 years old, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. One thing I knew, my dad was coming home. I had to give up them cigarettes, and I tried to like clean up a little bit. You know, I tried to like not hustle so much and tried to quit smoking weed. That wasn't gonna happen because I was trying to do right for when my dad came home. So Pops comes home. I was 14 in the 9th grade. No, actually, I think I was still 13, about to turn 14. Pops came home when I was in the 9th grade. So he left when I was 8. He came out when I was about 13, 14. So we did about 6 years in Fed. And so when he came home, I'm all excited. I'm going to have this great relationship with my dad. But I'm not going to lie, y'all. And this is advice to anybody that is going to do a bit and come home. I pray it's none of y'all. But, man, don't come home trying to be all hard and shit on your people, trying to take everything back. Like I remember he came home and he would be all on our ass. Oh, you ruined this. Oh, you lost that. It's like, yeah, well, where were you at? You know what I mean? Where were you at? It's our fault. Well, where the fuck were you to protect us? Where were you to teach us? You know what I mean? You were doing it over the phone while you were really just trying to be nosy and figure out what my mom was doing. And no disrespect to my dad. I love him. But that's the tone that he took when he came home from prison. So, you know, that'll turn you away. You know what I mean? Like, I was always told by my parents from a really young age, because my dad and my mom, they were out of touch. He was a multimillionaire and he thought he was going to stay like that. And my mom thought that he was going to come out and be the man again. Right? And my dad will always be the man to a certain extent, if you know my pops. But it wasn't all what they both thought it was going to be. You know, things didn't come as easy. Pops definitely wasn't taking penitentiary chances. So, you know, but he always said, don't worry about money. Don't worry about a job. Just go to school. I'll take care of everything. Like, that was how I was brought up. I wasn't brought up with a whole lot of work ethic. I wasn't brought up to be a real go-getter. I was brought up to just go to school and know that your parents are going to take care of everything because they're rich. Like, that's the way that I was brought up. But when Pops came home, we weren't rich. Matter of fact, while Pops was gone, my mom ended up taking up 2 jobs. That's a big part of why she wasn't around all the time. And she was in the nightlife. And a big part of what I left out of my early years was she used that nightlife to try to take me out of the streets, which was also kind of a blessing to me because she worked at the State Theater in Janice Landing. If you're familiar, those are 2 concert venues. So, you know, before Pops came home, when I was like a young adolescent, between probably 11 years old all the way till Pops came home at like 13, for those 2-3 years, I got to go to all the shows at the State in Janice because my mom worked there. And the managers, they love me. I think they were probably trying to fuck my mom, to be real with you. I'm not going to call any of the people out, but you know who you are if you're watching this. Yeah. You know, they would do things for me. They'd let me sit at the soundboard, you know, at the State, and I got to get into any show at Janice. I'd get posters, T-shirts, all that. So, you know, that in a way that kind of kept me out of the streets. But I mean, come on, mom's at work most of the time, and I can't, you know, I can't be with she can't hover over me the whole time. So, but what I'm telling you is, it only deepened my appreciation for music, all genres. I mean, from, you know, reggae, ska, punk rock. Like at 12 years old, I'm one minute I'm listening to, you know, pop and bone. The next minute I'm listening to like Rancid and NoFX, if you know about punk rock. You know, when I was 12 years old, I used to wear the big baggy jeans. I had the mohawk. You know, the chain wallet, you know, but I'm listening to Pac and Bone, but I'm also listening to that punk rock shit. So, you know, I'm kind of navigating these different worlds, right? Which a lot of people may not relate to. But what's kind of cool, this day and age, you see that much more. But when I was a kid, none of that shit wasn't cool. Mohawks wasn't cool. All that, you know, what you. I guess now it's kind of like emo. Emo wasn't a thing when I was a kid, but that shit wasn't cool when I was a kid. I used to walk out of the streets and get my ass whooped for looking like that and acting like that. But you know, it did teach me how to fight a little bit. But so, you know, the streets are hard. The streets are cool. The streets are judging. And, you know, I hit them hard. I hit the streets hard, you know. So when Pops came home, he tried to reel all that shit in. He tried to reel me in and had me going to the gym with him, had me doing handstand push-ups, I was doing a little bit of boxing. You know, it kind of worked until he would try to lay his hand down and not understand the way I'm living. Like, when I was 11, 12 years old, I didn't have a curfew. I left when I wanted. I came home when I wanted. How are you going to come home? You've been gone all this time and tell me to be home a certain time and do this a certain way. It's like we were bumping heads. And the more we bumped heads, the more that put me out in the streets. You know, and you're talking about you're going to take care of this, this, and this. But shit, I mean, I went to Hollywood High, y'all. I don't know if you know about Hollywood High, but in Hollywood High, if you weren't fresh every day, I mean, we had people dropping out of school because they didn't have the right outfits, and then hitting the streets, hitting the trap, and coming back to school fly at pickup, pulling up in, you know, in cars on rims and shit, stunting in front of school. Like, sadly, that was the materialism that had infected my high school and a lot of kids and even grown folks to this day. But you know, where do you go when you're trying to make a way and a job ain't paying the amount of money that you need to have the new Jordans or the new whatever, right? So, not to mention this, you know, this bud habit. So, you know, the more I clashed with my dad, the deeper I got into the streets. And I'll talk about one person. I'm not going to sit there and do a whole bunch of dry snitching and shit, but I will tell you how I learned how to trap. If you've been around a long time, then you know the name Ronnie Black and New World. So Ronnie Black pretty much had the city on lock. He was like the Nino Brown, like Mr. Get Down or Lay Down of St. Pete. He had all the trap spots. And it just so happened one of my close homeboys was his first cousin. So he took a liking to us. He took a favor to us, and he would literally protect us. I had so much love for that man. And now I will say that he didn't have the best reputation for some things. I mean, the man is serving life in prison for stabbing somebody and killing them with a sword. But, you know, when we were kids, he looked out for us, and he developed this genius system before Subway or anybody else had it, where when you went into one of Ronnie Black's traps, you got a card. And with that card, you got stamps. And if you filled that card up with stamps, you come back and you get a free sack. And he always had these little workers in there and shit. And I mean, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm disrespecting nobody. They were their own men. There was some real OGs coming out of New World. You know, a lot of y'all are gonna see this and think, damn, you know. And some people cleaned up their lives. Some people lost their lives. R.I.P. So, but this is how I learned how to trap and how to establish dominance and control, and how to handle your business and filter out weakness. But Ronnie Black had these young boys out there about my age at the time, you know, between 12 and 14, with walkie-talkies. They had these batons. If somebody gets wrong, they'd get them right. They'd walk around with machetes, and they would patrol the neighborhood. And, you know, if the police roll by, they're on the walkie-talkie, they would tell your car to circle the block. You always had to have somebody drop you off in front of the trap, circle the block, and then they radio when you come back when it's safe, right? I mean, they had a genius system put in place. And so, you know, this is how I learned to trap. And I'll never forget, like, we were on some dumb shit when we were kids. Like, I'd never been a thief, and, you know, I never really been into robbing. I mean, I understand desperate times. I'm not trying to judge nobody, but that was never my thing. And I never had a lot of respect for anybody who took. My thing was always hustle. And, you know, but we were on some like lightweight crackhead shit where we would take our video games, jewelry, and pawn it, right? To get money to go buy weed. But crackhead games never lasted long in my world. I never respected that shit. So, but I do remember when I took a piece of jewelry and I pawned it, and I took that money and I went to the trap and I bought my first zip, Matter of fact, I think I bought 2. It was like a special deal I got. And back then they were spraying embalming fluid with weed. This ain't no fucking exotic. There was no such thing. It wasn't even mids. This was motherfucking Reggie, you know, doo-doo brown motherfucking weed. But it got you high as fuck because they sprayed embalming fluid on it. And it wasn't long because it was damp and they sprayed it that it would turn into mold. So I'm selling these sacks that got mold on it and shit, lying like a motherfucker, saying, "Oh, it's Maui Wowie. That's not mold. That's like the crystals, you know, this type of thing. Like this is how we got to hustling." Well, without diving into every little detail, you know, nicks turned to dimes, dimes turned to quarters, quarters turned to halves, halves turned to zips, zips turned to QPs, you know, and things start getting deeper. So, for me, I never was like, "Oh, I want to be a drug dealer. I want to be in the streets." But you see the people that you're doing, these are your role models. Now, meanwhile, your role models are getting killed. Your role models are getting locked up. I'll never forget, I ain't going to say his name, but one of the homies that was one of Ronnie Black's main man, I thought he was my guy. And we went to a meet one time, and he put a Mac 11 to my chest. And I know this dude, and I know guns a little bit. Like, there's some things I'm going to leave out because they don't need to be discussed. But I remember he cocked back the Mac 11, and when the hammer, or when it slid back, I could hear it was hollow. There wasn't nothing in it. So I'm like, "Man, really, bro? Like, what you trying to do? Like, you know me, I know you. Like, what you..." And this crazy motherfucker behind me, whose eyes were this big, I know he was on that shit. He had an old rusty 9mm and he cocked it back, and I'll never forget when the bullet slid into the chamber. I heard it, and he pushed that motherfucker against my head so hard. He said, "Hands on the dash or your brains on the dash." I'm not gonna lie, y'all. I had a 38 under the seat, and my mind was moving. Like, what could I have done? But in that moment, my good sense told me, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, this same person I'm talking about is doing life for murder right now. You know, and so, you know, my time could have come in that moment if I didn't make the right decisions and follow my better instincts. But I'll tell you what, from that point on, that pistol didn't stay under the seat. That pistol stayed right here under my shirt. You never know I have it. But if it needs to come out, it's ready. And so, you know, these are the role models. These are the people that are teaching me the game. And it's like, at what point in life do you start to question your destiny? You know, the deeper I got, the realer shit got. And at some point you lose yourself, right? So all my life, as early as I can remember, I told you about, you know, being depressed, being suicidal. I told you about all the bullshit that's happening around me. But what I never spoke on was my passion. I told you music was my refuge, and all I ever wanted was to do something with music. I didn't know what. I remember my mom got me a snare drum one Christmas. It was too loud. She took it away, right? How are you going to get good if you can't practice? And then my godparents bought me a guitar with an amp. And I'm sitting there trying to, you know, figure this shit out, and it was too loud. My mom took it away. Again, how are you going to get better if you don't practice? But the one thing I always did was I wrote. You know, my sister wrote, and I would try to keep up with her. She would write poems. I would like try to imitate her poems. But in this world of music, my life experience translated to poetry, and at some point, being an avid hip hop enthusiast, I got into rap. And, you know, of course, it would start with what we would call the sessions, right? We pass the joint around, you get high, you put on a song, you start rapping over it. And these are in the days of Jam Pony. If you remember Jam Pony, this is when they would play like mainstream songs. This is before like mixtapes as we know it. Literally rapping over people's shit, not just rapping over beats. You'd have, you know, the song with the lyrics in it, and then the Jam Pony DJ would turn down the music and rap over it and then turn it back up and basically just ad lib. I mean, you might think it's funny or corny or whatever, but back then that was it. They would throw big block parties at Bartlett Park. They'd call them Chunky Sunday and have big, pony shows, Jam Pony Express. For us, it was like, it was just for fun. But in my mind, it's like, how am I going to be in this music business? I don't have patience for instruments, and I'm not some next level singer. And so, where's my niche? Where do I fall in? But by this time, you got so many working parts, survival, making it home at night, trying to get your little Nick sack to smoke, or, trying to find a new plug that's got the best weed and trying to make it home safe off that. You know what I mean? And then so in the middle of all this survival, you're trying to find these passions, find out who you are, but following all these different people in all these different directions, all of them being the wrong direction, right? Well, one could argue the right, because we have to live through experience and learn through error. But I want to talk about my homeboy C Mill real quick, Charlie Jones. C Mill was my in-house producer, as a lot of y'all know, and he produced my first project, which I'll get to in another podcast. But when we were kids, man, C Mill was that dude. He dressed so fly. He was the coolest motherfucker I ever knew in my entire life, C Mill. Right? So, of course, I got these role models in the streets. And then there was the one homie my age who would run away from home and skip school and come to my house because I never went to school anyway. And, of course, it was the refuge. So I got real close with C Mill. And C Mill was obsessed with Bone, which kind of brought me to be obsessed with Bone Thugs and Harmony. And so I remember our early days of writing raps, we would literally play a Bone song and then try to write out the lyrics. So who the fuck knows what they were saying, right? To this day, right? But then we would put our lyrics together and we would argue about who was right and who was wrong. And I'm not gonna lie, C Mill always had them right. I always had them wrong. And C Mill lived on 51st and 8th Street, which is real quiet now, but back in the day, that was like the most happening block in our whole little section. That's where the bus stop was. That's where, people would meet to fight, and all this crazy hood shit going on right in front of his house. And we'd be skipping school behind the fence, smoking our little joint, watching all kinds of chaos unfold, from like the sidelines. So, this is how we jumped off the porch. And so now to kind of tie this all together, we started, rapping as just for fun, ciphers and this and that. We were hustling to get high. Well, at some point, C Mill got a beat machine, right? Now we got beats. Now it gets real. So now we're writing raps. Nobody knows how to count bars, but really we're in the streets, and in our spare time when we're staying up late, getting high, doing what we do, then, we start trying to write these raps with no rhyme or reason, literally, like just writing down whatever. Well, I'll never forget. I was probably in the 10th grade. I'm already in the streets. I'm already moving my little this and that. I got a little name for myself in the neighborhood for, not necessarily good things. And there was this dude, AG. A lot of y'all might know him as AG the Hustler. Now, AG had this little computer set up, and I'll never forget, it was the AOL microphone that you would use for chatting, right? Set up on his computer. And AG had all these beats that he was getting off the internet. Now, I kind of got the OG card already in the 10th grade with some of this younger, crowd where, because I had the weed and shit, you know what I mean? So, and I knew all the traps. I was, I'm not going to say I was the plug, but I knew the plug. So, they wanted to fuck with me, and they knew I rapped, and I'm not going to sit there and say I was the best rapper, but they wanted to fuck with me. So AG hits me up and he's like, yo, I got this recording space and I need artists. You know, and he knows I got all the bros and shit. So he's like, well, let's all meet at my crib after school and we're gonna pick a beat and we're gonna make a song, right? So I had the homie A1, Amos, the homie Matt Batson, shout out Matt Batson, Frank Nitty, the homie Frank Nitty, shout out Frank, and who else was on the joint? And of course AG the Hustler. So we went to his house, he played this beat, and we recorded the first recording, and it by far not professional. The furthest from professional you could possibly get, on like a 4-track recorder or something with an AOL microphone. But somehow this little shitty burnt CD became an anthem for the city. They were passing it around in at different high schools, and like, you know, mainly with the white boys. I'm not gonna say the whole city was rocking my 15-year-old, you know, song. I was 15 at the time, and but the hook went like this. I had the homie AG say, now where you from? It was a call and response, and I come in, I'm from the Bird, baby, that's where I stay. And then AG comes in, who do you be? We be them players from the Bay, baby. What do you do? Stack paper to the death of us, dog. What that be like? That be like something that y'all can't see at all. And so we all got on this track together, and as shit as the recording was, I'm not gonna lie, to this day, that joint is fire. That joint is fire. And I mean, you know, it's shitty recordings, but for a 15-year-old, it wasn't too bad. And I had, at the time, I had six to the bottom, gold, pull-out grill. So I had like this lisp when I talk. Not intentional, but it kind of made it sound a little bit grimy in the chorus and the verse. So this was the beginning of my music journey. And the point where it was time to take it serious. So, mind you, music is expensive now if you want to get it right. You know, you get mixing, you get mastering and all that. You get studio time. But of course, we didn't have all these little apps you could record on the phone. We didn't have these cheap interfaces that you could plug up and, you know, do multi-tracks on from your bedroom. We didn't have that. So if you wanted to really make quality music, you had to have a budget and you had to get studio time and you had to have an engineer and a beat maker, right? It wasn't as easy back then as it is now. But I gotta give it to AG. That man dived into all these magazines. He learned to do all that shit by himself, right? And I think he had like a little inheritance or something, and he ended up kicking off this big time studio. But what I realized at about that point, or I should say a little bit closer to when I graduated from high school, was that this is what I want to do. I'm not no plumber. I'm not no carpenter. I damn sure ain't no military person. So like, this is what I want to do with my life. I want a career in music. And this is during the time of Master P. You know, that's like the early hustlers, you know, a little bit past the days of, you know, Suge and all that. But I'm talking about independent artists, you know, Master P, Cash Money, you know, E40. And these were who we looked up to, who we were listening to. And in my mind, this is what I'm going to be, right? I'm going to be a rapper, producer, you know, and I'm going to put other people on. And this is when the vision started to become real. The name of that song was Business First, right? Now, AG and I drifted apart, but he started a label. And you know what he called it? Business First, the title of my first song. I saw that as respect. But in the process, I realized that I needed to have funds if I was going to make this dream come true. And that's when I did start to get deeper into the streets. And again, you know, when you're in the streets, you're fucking with people in the streets. And not everybody has that vision. Not everybody sees it as a means to an end. You know, people have goals like, I'm going to have X amount of a kilo dream, or 100,000, a million, whatever the dollar amount go. For me, it wasn't ever about the money. For me, it was about, this is the means to an end. This is what I'm going to use to fund my music, right? Things got a little bit out of hand, and I'll touch on that. But right now, I think it's a good time to take a break, because I told you how I got into the streets, and we segued into the music, right? So this is where it gets heavy, where I get deep. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about, how the streets pull you in, and how you really start to lose yourself. And the more money you make, the more it gets to your head, and then the vision starts to become cloudy. So I appreciate y'all tuning in to episode 3. And episode 4, I'm going to take you deeper into the streets, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my musical journey and the struggle to separate the two and, unintentionally marry the two together, which is only a recipe for consequence and disaster. So make sure you hit that like button, subscribe button, follow. I appreciate y'all tapping in. I will see you on episode 4 of Live Struggle Legacy. We're the Pyramids, y'all.
Live struggle legacy. It's a whole movement.